Honorable participants, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good evening, and a very warm welcome to Pakistan's consulate. This is Saima Jameel. I am the consul in Pakistan.
If there is an ongoing example of failure of colonial machinations, we see that example in the state of Jammu and Kashmir today. A tragic history that has lasted for more than 100 years of British and India, tyranny and oppression. When the British came, they saw in a beautiful Kashmir a threat to their
That's a core
textile.
part of Kashmir Solidarity Day. We should, if we're making this event in Sydney, ground it in the fact that we're on Gadigal land, we're on First Nations land, and take our collective commitment to walk with First Nations peoples of this country over this year and the years that come, for truth, for treaty, for voice, and for self-determination. As we all know, Kashmir Solidarity Day is a national holiday observed in both Pakistan and Kashmir and Jammu on the 5th of February annually. It's been observed now for over 30 years, and it's a time to reinforce that commitment to uphold the fundamental human rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And that's a fundamental right to determine their own future, to determine their own government, to be free of occupation, to be free of the violence of occupation. And this day, I think, should remind us that the international community has so much more to do to honour its obligation to stand up for those universal rights of self-determination, to be free from the oppression and violence, and to commit, again, to those UN resolutions that are contained here in the booklet that's shared today, which speak to that international support, the international support that we should recommit to forging, to allow the people of Jammu and Kashmir to determine their own future through a free plebiscite or free plebiscites.
Kashmir Solidarity Day, the pain and the suffering the Kashmiri people also suffer. This loss of life is a reminder about that pain. And on these special days, I think we need to remind ourselves that Kashmir is experiencing one of the most protracted and bloody occupations in the world, and one of the most ignored. The Indian military have between 800,000 and 1 million in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Now, it's hard to get exact figures, but whatever it is, it's actually very revealing. Way more than the number of Western troops in Afghanistan. At the peak of that war, there were 130,000 troops. At the peak of the Iraq war in 2007, the US had 170,000. Here we're talking about over 800,000. Imagine what near to 1 million troops, 800,000, 1 million, whatever it is, illegally occupying your country are doing. That number alone reveals how desperate the Modi government is to suppress the local people.
On Kashmir Solidarity Day, and I would like to thank the High Commissioner and the Deputy Consul General for inviting me here today. And it is really important for us as we are together in this room to recommit ourselves to justice for the Kashmiri people. And I know that many people around the world who are also warriors for justice will be doing exactly the same on Sunday. Before I say any more, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Gadigal people. I acknowledge them as the sovereign owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present. This land is, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. And I think this is also an opportunity to reflect on the parallels, as a few other people have said before, between the plight of First Nations people in this country and that of the people of Kashmir. In both cases, strong, resilient, resistant people who have endured violent occupation for decades, for their right just to live with dignity and self-determination, which has been so long denied. And in both cases, British imperialism, driven by greed and driven by racism, is at the root of the injustice that we see today. And I think I do want to bring in the Palestinians who are in exactly the same situation and show solidarity with them today as well. Because we all know when the British hastily carved up the South Asian subcontinent before fleeing, or really after being kicked out, of the subcontinent. And I'm sure, like my forebears, many of yours were involved in that struggle and made massive sacrifices to get us to where we are today as an independent country. But I think it is that colonialism, which was 2 centuries violent, extractive, and in which once the partition took place and the subcontinent was carved up, the Kashmiris literally had no say in that.
As we speak here, you heard all the panelists. I am again grateful to them for speaking out on the Kashmir issue. But this is not here that they have spoken about the Kashmir issue. This is not only here that they have spoken on the violation of Kashmiris' rights. They have said the same thing from the floor of the Parliament of Australia. We've seen Dr. Ratib Junaid and AFIC under his leadership speaking on different occasions about the violations of the rights of the Kashmiri people. As we speak here today, the Kashmiris continue to suffer. The Kashmiris continue to suffer under illegal occupation of India. The Kashmiris continue to suffer immensely due to the gross and systematic violations of their human rights. Today, as we speak, the Kashmiri leadership, the true Kashmiri leadership, still remain incarcerated. As we speak here, the Kashmiris continue to be killed extrajudicially in fake encounters and staged cordon and search operations. The Kashmiris continue to face, even today, as the world is watching, the Kashmiris continue to face collective punishment for speaking out, for speaking for their right to self-determination, and for speaking up for their rights. Only last year, more than 200 Kashmiris were killed in extrajudicial encounters and in staged cordon and search operation in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Human rights organizations and the so-called champions of human rights as to why are they silent on the abuses of the Kashmiri people's right to self-determination, as to why they are silent on the gross and systematic human rights abuses being taking place in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Kashmiris are also asking questions about the universality of human rights. They are asking as to why the gross and systematic human rights violations that are taking place in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are not being taken as seriously as human rights violations taking place elsewhere. The Kashmiris are also asking questions about the non-negotiability of the human rights. Kashmiris are asking as to why other things like the commercial and economic interests are given precedence over the human rights. Human rights are universal, human rights are non-negotiable. So Kashmiris are right to ask these questions from the international community.